AR triggers, huge amount of information, and I'm going to try to pack it into a very short time. AR triggers I categorize into 3 categories: single stage, 2 stage, and then specialized, something like this, a cassette trigger. We'll get into this in a minute. This is a mil-spec trigger. This one right here is Schmid Castings. Schmid does the majority of quality castings and AR parts. We see them pretty regular. They're good stuff. The castings themselves are good. What does mil-spec mean? Mil-specs means that it can't be below 5.5 pounds and it has to be a single stage. That leaves a lot to be desired. Most mil-spec triggers have a whole bunch of crunchy, gritty steps along the way before the trigger actually breaks and it fires. And they're almost always over 6 pounds. Mil-spec triggers, what do I think of them? Yeah, that's what I think of them. They're garbage. And quite frankly, this is the best upgrade that you can do to any AR right off of the bat. The trigger is one of the most vital pieces that connects the shooter to the firearm. Every time you make the gun go boom, you're going to utilize the trigger. And if you're pulling the trigger and you're moving the gun because the trigger is heavy and crappy and gritty, it makes it much more difficult to be accurate. The further out you go, the smaller the target you go, the more responsible this trigger can be for a miss. So, with that said, let's talk about the different types. Single stage, this one here is a $70 trigger. This is made by multiple companies. These are considered combat triggers. They're mil-spec, usually 5.5 to 6 pounds. Okay, hard wall. Single stage means there's a hard wall, or initially, and you're pulling through, and then it's releasing, okay? So that's about 6 pounds. This is a Hyperfire Heavy Gunner, or EDT, just depends upon how old the packaging is. Same thing, single stage, it's about 4.5 pounds. This is a Hyperfire Competition. They call them Hyper Touches now. They used to be called 24Cs. This one has booster springs on here. This is about 3 pounds, very short, very crisp single stage. This one is a Geisley. This one's a little bit different, is that this one was designed from a 2-stage into a single stage. So when you're releasing this one, you'll see as I pull through slowly, it actually has, from the hard wall, it has some take up before it breaks. And you don't feel a hard wall before it breaks. You're actually pulling through and it's releasing and you're not feeling that release point. It's called a blind release, okay? These have a little bit of a blind release to them. Some people love these, some people don't love these. These are originally designed for 3-gun shooters. I know, right? Super 3-gun, the name, duh. But some people like that blind release. I'm not a huge fan of it, but they're great triggers. They use through hardened bar stock to make these, and that's why they're so much more expensive. But they're pretty much bomb-proof. The Hyperfire, this is what I use in competition a lot. These are meant to go fast and take chances with. They shoot extremely well. Now, there's been 2 different types of these. The earlier version, this one is an earlier version, has a bar here and then these rods attached to the bar. And if these rods are put on backwards, then they don't fit the same way. They need to go on to a specific way. This yoke locks the pieces all in together with the spring back here. These were a complete pain in the ass to put together when they first came out. We did it, and they are very fast. We like these triggers. But when they came out with the upgraded version with the single piece in here, that's holding the springs in place, and then the yoke and the saddle back here, these are much better. So make sure you're getting a modern day version of one of these if you buy one, and this is a single piece yoke. They're really great triggers. I use these in most of my short guns simply because they're fairly inexpensive, $100. They're 4.5 pounds. They're nice and short and clean, and they work really well. They don't have enough definition, in my opinion, to shoot reliably out to, 300 yards with a red dot. And so I really kind of go to something like this on more of my competition guns. But great general purpose trigger. These are 70 bucks. These are made by multiple different companies in different sets. That's a Psionics. This is the Sons of Liberty, their fighting trigger, and then the ALG EDT, or sorry, ACT advanced combat trigger. These are all mil-spec. They work extremely well for 70 bucks. They are an exponentially better trigger than any mil-spec trigger out there. So if you want to stay within mil-spec, you want something fairly expensive, this is where you go. Okay, two-stage. Two-stage trigger means I'm pulling this trigger, I have a preparatory phase, pulling the trigger to a hard wall. Once I reach that hard wall, I'm adding pressure, and it pulls through, okay? So, reset, take the preparatory phase out to the hard wall, add pressure, and it breaks. Same thing. Preparatory phase, and it breaks through, okay? So, this is an Aero Precision. This one is about 80 bucks, 90 bucks. It has Schmid castings and it's nickel boron coated. Not a bad trigger for 80 bucks, to be honest with you, especially if you want something cheaper and you're going to use it longer distance shooting. Geisley SSA. If in doubt and you have no idea what to do and you're willing to spend the money, I would spend $240 and put a Geisley SSA in any gun as general purpose use overall forever. This is it. This is the one that rules the roost right now. If you have any questions, just get an SSA and throw it in there. You really can't screw that up. SSAE. These work better in longer distance shooting. They're a pound lighter, so you lose about half a pound of take up and half a pound of break. Okay, these work really good in longer distance shooting ARs. So the Super Dynamic Combat and the SSA are essentially the exact same trigger. This has a flat shoe. This has a round shoe. That is the only difference between those two triggers. So if you want an SSA but you want a flat shoe, it's the Super Dynamic Combat. They also make a Super Dynamic Elite, which is a pound lighter just like the SSAE. Okay? Specialized triggers. Specialized triggers have a place. Some people will poo-poo on the cassette trigger. I will be the first one to do it. But if you're using something extremely long range, using it in competition, you're not shooting it fast. In other words, you're not going bang, 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 bang. When you do that, the gun heats up. And as the gun heats up, the AR in particular, they can actually have a higher cyclic speed because of that. And they'll start to run a little bit faster. If they get to the point to where it's running slightly too fast, you can pop a primer out. If you get the primer in one of these, you're done. It's really tough to get it out, especially if an anvil falls in there. And just getting this cassette out of the gun in the field, it's a train wreck, man. It's awful. I see these screw competition shooters over all the time. Something like this that you can take apart in the field and put back together with a punch is a much better option in my opinion. I pulled 4 primers out of guns in the last 6 years at competitions, popped primers. And I've had a couple that were in these and I'm like, nope, forget about it. Put it in a bag and go get a backup gun. So specialized use, long distance shooting, PCC, maybe. I'm playing around with one in a PCC right now, trying to figure out if it's acceptable or not. I'm not convinced yet. It took 45 minutes for me to put it in the system. I'll show it to you here in a minute. It was, I don't know that it's any better than this, to be honest with you. So specialized triggers, only for very specialized use. For general purpose in any way, shape, or form, anything that you're going to get onto and run fast, stay away from the cassettes, man. They are, 99% of the time, they are the wrong choice. And one of these will get you there in a much better, higher quality setup. Let me show you some of the other setups in guns. All right, real quick. This is the Chimney Trigger that I have. This is the PCC model, and it has this block in the back here so that when the hammer gets cocked by the bolt carrier group, this hammer hits the back of this instead of actually going all the way down and hitting the disconnector. Okay, so this, you can see these 2 screw slots right here. Those 2 screws get screwed down against a plate and it retains this in place with the pins. That basically pinches them in place. I see those come loose all the time and then you lose your pins. So you essentially have to use K&S pins on these. That's all there is to it. Now this is a PCC, so I don't have to worry about pop primers like I do with 223, 556, and even 300 blackout. This system will not necessarily start to accelerate like a 223-556 will. If you're shooting a NATO spec or 223-556 type AR, the faster you're pulling that trigger, you'll actually heat the gun up and it'll start to cycle faster and faster and faster. And sometimes you can get it so fast that it will actually pop a primer out and it'll fall down in here. If the anvil comes out of the primer and it gets stuck in one of these little pieces in these areas around here, and you cannot take this cartridge apart to get it out, you're done. It's over. Your shit's locked up. Have a nice whatever. These are 10 times harder to get into the gun and out of the gun than a normal trigger mechanism. So if you're trying to do that in the field, which I have done 4 times in the last 6 years, so anybody that says it doesn't happen is a liar. It happens a lot, especially in competition. If you're trying to get that trigger mechanism out of there and clean that primer out of there in between stages, you are finally fucked and far from home if you have a cassette trigger like this. So having multiple piece triggers, it makes it a lot easier. You punch the pin out and then you go on with life. That's cassette trigger, okay? Specialized use, be very careful with them. I don't recommend them 99% of the time. This is what the Hyperfire competition trigger looks like in the gun, okay? So you can see that, see how that yoke works? No retainers required, okay? See? Very solid. So this is what a Geisley looks like inside of the gun. Very simple. Once again, straight pins, okay? Nothing holding them in place. Geisley's pins are actually exceptional. In my opinion, they're the best pins on the market when it comes to assembly, which I'll go through assembly and putting triggers in an AR here shortly in another video.